got a timer here. I'm going to put it on. All right, and welcome everyone. I'm not sure how this is going to go. This is Dunder Moose, the channel. This is our first time live streaming on YouTube. Psychotronic domain level play with Rick Stump. Rick, thank you so much for agreeing to come on this. Very generous of you. We were in a conversation on Twitter, and I was very interested in the topic. We do have a topic today, Braunstein, or domain level play, or patron players, however you want to say it. But I would be remiss if we just jumped right into it without going over a little bit about your background, what you've accomplished, and who you are. So I'm going to start off with some simple true or false, yay or nay questions, and then I'll open it up into the more open-ended stuff. So, you have been running a campaign called C-Word for 44 years.
Just a little over, correct. Yeah.
A little over 44 years. All right. And it is an Advanced Dungeons & Dragons first edition?
Correct.
How do you feel about Unearthed Arcana?
We use the vast majority of the spells from Unearthed Arcana. We use them. I have an older version of Barbarian from a White Dwarf, and my own version of Cavalier that I call the Nobleman that I use.
Okay.
But in general, yeah, it's a fine book.
Okay, because there are some people that feel like UA is sketch compared to the original 3.
Well, it's obviously a bunch of options. I will pimp out my own book. I've got a book called Far Realms, which is about 1/5 of my house rules, and I've had reviewers call it the book that Unearthed Arcana should have been.
So yeah, you've got Harbinger Games on Drive-Thru RPG, so that link's on the screen now if anybody wants to.
Yes, and I am migrating to multiple platforms for various reasons. So Big Geek Emporium also carries my stuff.
Excellent.
And Gumroad also carries my stuff, and you can get hard copies at Lulu. All that's for my blog, which you can find pretty easy through Twitter or just searching it.
Or I could pop it up right here.
Yeah.
Okay. So let me get back to the true or false. Only one more before we open it up. Do you guys use modules?
Here's how we do modules. Every 1 to 3 years around Halloween time, I pull out a module. Everyone makes one-shot characters, and we play the module.
Right on. So I'm assuming the Halloween module's got a theme, like a spooky October theme.
Well, a lot of modules do. We did the Ghost Tower of Inverness once, which is a very spooky sort of thing, and that was that's a speed run. They did a speed run on it, but the classic speed run they did was on Ravenloft.
Okay.
We did a Ravenloft one shot where they cleared the entire thing and killed Strahd in 4 hours and 20 minutes of tabletop.
Wow. How is that even possible?
Well, the Gypsy told us where everything is, so we went there and we killed them. It's literally their quote.
Got it.
But it did have a famous quote. They're going through the town, and there's a famous scene where the door is broken down, and inside, you hear a woman crying in despair. The party went by and described this to them. They're like, well, if I lived in downtown Dracula Town, I'd be crying too. And they just went on.
Right on. That's so. Well, I mean, so you were the DM was ready to go quick, and the players were ready to go quick, and everyone knew what they were doing. What do you think is the difference between a normal D&D session and a Halloween one? Because it seems to me like normal D&D has tons of scary stuff in it. It's got
well, like I said, when we do our Halloween is just, and it's not every year, is just we do something that I didn't create. That's only the real difference. But D&D it can be a pretty creepy game. I've actually about 2 years ago, had the players tell me, and this has happened more than once, listen, we need to take 15 minutes. This was way too intense. The hair on the back of my body is, the back of my neck is literally standing up. I need to go walk this off. And everyone's like, yeah, we need to get some distance.
So, like, how do you feel when they say that?
That I've done my job.
Yeah. I mean, that's winning, right? Like, when the players are so emotionally invested, they're like, we need a break.
Yeah, when they literally have to take a break because they're so emotionally wound up about the contents of the campaign and what's going on, that's success. That's how you win. Mm-hmm.
And is that something you aim for, or is that something that emerges naturally?
That's got to emerge naturally. You can't make that happen.
Yeah. Yeah, if you try to force it, it's cheesy, right?
Yeah, we're not theater kids. We're not out there. Matter of fact, I think that in the last 4 years, I've had 3 players speaking character for a total of 1.5 minutes. There's a great deal of, well, I'm just going to have them talk to the headman, or we're going to figure this out on our own, or send a note. We are not a critical role, which, by the way, I've never seen a minute of critical role. We're not anything like that where we're always in character and we're hitting our marks and we're pitching our voice. No, we're the opposite. We're very much sit down and play, describing what's going on. You know?
And yet, it is still immersive enough for people to get, like, to need a break emotionally. And I think that's fascinating.
I think it's easier that way, personally.
All right. So, but aside from once a year, you do not need any modules, and you're only doing that just for funsies, right? Like your campaign.
Right. Yeah.
Generate.
That's literally to give everybody a break. Seaward in particular can be very involving. And taking 2 weeks off in the middle of, and you have to understand too, there's a family thing going on. In the family, we have, I believe it's 3 birthdays in 16 days in October. Okay. So around that time, we sort of take a break from other gaming, prepare for this one shot, do it, and then get back to work. And it's sort of just a break. And
does the stuff that because you said it's all new characters for the one shot.
Yeah.
Does the stuff that happens in the one shot get wrapped into what's going on in Seaward, or is it kind of like
no?
Treehouse of Horror?
That's literally just like it's like an intramural game. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, good to know. So it kind of gives you some freedom to.
I've never had a module that survived contact. I heavily rewrite everything.
Okay.
I think the closest I came to keeping it as is was Ravenloft, and that was, hysterically easy.
All right. Okay, so that's the end of my kind of short yay or nay questions.
Sure.
Next, I want to go back. So it's 1977.
Mm-hmm.
You're 11 years old. You go to Ball State.
No, I was 9 years old in 77.
9 years old. Gotcha. 11 was when you started DMing, right?
It was my 12th birthday weekend was when I started Dungeon Mastering, right?
All right. So you're 9 years old, and you're at Ball State, and your babysitter has insisted that her college buddies let you play a game.
Yes. She demanded they let me play.
All right. What happened?
The Dungeon Master, who was the son of a good friend of my father, said, okay. One of the players there helped me roll up an elf, fighter magic user. And they said, hey, do you want to go in front? And I said, sure. And I said, I'll walk in front. And I said, what do you do? I'm walking down the hallway. Well, you weren't checking, so you fall into a pit trap. You land on the spikes, and they roll, and your character dies. I'm like, okay.
Were they just trying to get rid of you, or was this just kind of like...
I'm convinced that his character died, we get rid of him. I said, now what do I do? And she said, we can make a new character. I'm like, oh, okay. And boom, I was hooked.
All right, so coolest babysitter ever.
Yeah, she was.
Let me get this straight. You play a game, your teammates send you into the dungeon first, and you immediately die. And you make a new one, and you're hooked. What was satisfying about that? Because I feel like a lot of people nowadays would be like, well, this game sucks.
I realized that the decisions that I made had consequences in the game. It wasn't like Chutes and Ladders or Monopoly in the bad ways. it was like chess or Monopoly in the good ways. You make decisions, and then you get rewarded or you get penalized depending on how they're good. But you can learn and grow and get better next time. So I made another character, a paladin, because I had all the add-ons and stuff, and I rolled really good. And I still got that sheet somewhere.
You still got your first
My second character. The first character died, and I don't know where that went.
Yeah.
But my second character, I still have.
Nice. So, and this was OD&D.
OD&D, yeah, Brown Books, and it was a position where nobody at the table owned the full set. You know, this guy had 3, that guy had 1, this guy had 2.
Cool.
Yeah.
So what lessons do you think for modern gamers? Because I've seen on Twitter, and I don't want to assume that, you know, all the drama on Twitter is like how people actually game. I feel like there's like a few really confident voices that may speak for more than who they're trying to represent. But the idea that a character shouldn't die without their player's permission, or that we have to handle that very gently, or you know, just very much sensitivity about what happens to your character. And here you are saying, I was a kid, I walked in there, you know, they set me up like a sucker, I fell on the pit, I died, and I loved it.
When you start playing a game like Dungeons and Dragons, you are giving permission for the character to go into peril. Right?
Yes.
Therefore, you've already consented to the concept that you can die, the character can fail. There has to be a fail state. Just like there has to be some sort of win state, session to session. So the mere fact, when you say, okay, my character does not run away in terror and hide from the villains, means that you've accepted the chance that this character could perish. Right?
Yeah.
And I think part of this is a misunderstanding of the nature of some role-playing games. Now, there are some role-playing games where that sort of argument makes sense. Here's an example. Champions is a superhero game.
Yeah.
It's really, really difficult under the rules, if you're playing at superhero levels, for somebody to get hurt badly, let alone killed. So recently, well, 2 years ago now, one of my players came to me and said, well, here's this arc I want to do. This is something I want to do. It's not a story arc, because although there are story game elements in any superhero game, it's not how we play it. He goes, this is what I want to do. Set it up, and his character died. Right? And it was pre-planned. Shocking twist. He didn't die. He was spirited away, replaced with a fake, and now he's a supervillain. Right? So,
okay.
In a game like that, it makes sense. If you're playing with kids and you're playing something like, I don't know, a Torchbearer or something, you might want to be prepared for that. Mm-hmm. But if you're playing old school or even 5th edition AD&D, you've got to understand that's just a risk you take.
There's a difference between a powerful character and a good player.
Of course there is.
And you know when you're playing with a good player. When
you're playing with a good player, the power level of the character is sort of moot, and the reverse is actually worse. If you're playing with a bad player, the power level of the character, the higher the power level, the worse your experience in mine. That's why I'm totally against Mighty Hall Adventuring.
Yeah.
Right. Completely against it.
Okay. That's kind of teasing into the main topic, but I'm still interested in what happened next. So you go home from the college experience, and your brain's on fire.
Yep.
Did you get to play anymore after that, and how did that happen?
Well, the very next weekend, my babysitter comes over. I talk to her. She explains all this stuff to my parents, who were very interested. Mm-hmm. I was a precocious child, and my parents were very engaged in me having outlets to read and be creative and do writing.
And you were no stranger to Appendix N, right? Like,
my father was a massive fan of the pulps.
Yeah. Massive.
When I got the Dungeon Master's Guide, virtually every book on that list we had in the house and I'd read.
All right. And like,
I had a complete collection of the entire reprints of the Barsoom books as they came out. We would get them. Massive fan of the Appendix N stuff.
And so how did being steeped in that culture help you appreciate or understand the game? Because I feel like we've lost a lot of that.
Well, a lot of people talked about how and why those books were harder to come by, but we'll get to that in a minute.
Hmm.
When you've read stuff like Red Nails
Yeah.
or the Queen of the Black Coast, that sort of stuff, when you run into a winged ape or a giant lizard terrorizing people trapped underground, you know exactly what's going on from this fiction.
Right on.
If you read Three Hearts and Three Lions and you read Paladin, you're like, oh, sure. Even further back than that, my father had a big collection of The Matter of France. These are, Orlando Furioso, Orlando Amarata. These are the adventure fiction from the 15th, 16th, 17th centuries.
Wow.
Translated in English. So I've been reading about the paladins of Charlemagne and those adventure stories from the age of 6 on. So the idea of a magical lance, that's where it came from. Magical swords. These things were just common.
The primal stuff.
Yeah, this is the stuff where we don't even know. A lot of modern adventure fiction is based on this stuff from way back when. You have to understand, adventure fiction about knights with magical swords, talking horses, flying carpets, wizards that could cast balls of fire, was so popular in the late medieval, early Renaissance period that the book Don Quixote is making fun of the hardcore fans of those novels.
Yeah.
That's how popular they were.
Yeah.
It was like making fun of weebs today. Oh my gosh, all this guy does is read this adventure fiction. And having read that, it was really easy. I know for a fact it has to be true. The Gygax and the rest were familiar with that stuff because there's so many elements in there. And then you've also got, the Carnelian Cube, you've got the Cubic Gate, and you've got Jack Vance. I mean, his spells are directly referenced. So that really helped. I knew kind of what was going on. Now, in the modern world, what's interesting is I didn't read any of the Lord of the Rings until I was 16 years old.
Okay, so I mean that's kind of a third rail to touch because there are a lot of people nowadays that believe that most of AD&D was Lord of the Rings, and I don't know
elements
where
in
that
there.
comes
I mean,
from.
you got. I mean, elves and dwarves. That's classic literature too.
Yeah,
but you got halflings and you got treants, and so it's in there.
And famously, there were some legal concerns and stuff, right?
Well, they used the name hobbits and used the name ents. Yeah.
Yeah. But the harlot table from the DMG definitely does not come out of Middle Earth.
No, that's not Middle Earth. That's a lot more Vance.
Yeah,
that's a Jack Vance thing right there.
Or I'm thinking Lankmar as well, like
Lankmar, yeah.
Yeah.
Was it Shield of the Seven Eyes? Or I got that one back in the Shield of the Eyeless Face. I can never remember. But yes, and you had all that stuff going on. No, the literature helped a great deal, but at the same time, the core concepts are so universal. I've got a series of little tools that I use if I'm teaching kids to play for the first time. One of them is I got these little strips of paper where I've got pictures of D4 through D20 printed out.
Yeah.
And so they can just put the dice on there and there's a number, so D4. So I say, hey, roll a D12, they can just look and pick it up off the sheet of paper, roll it, put it back, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when I get a 9, 10-year-old kid who doesn't read very well, doesn't like reading, has never seen the Lord of the Rings movies or anything else like that, their parents don't let them watch horror adventure films and sit them down and say, okay, you can be a cleric, describe all the 4 basic classes, which one do you want to be? They're like, oh, I want to do this, and they got a good idea what it does.
Mm-hmm.
These ideas are very simple, very basic to human imagination. So in the absence of being steeped in Appendix N like I was, you can still graft it very quickly, and people do. You see it all the time.
Yeah, I will say from my own experience, I've got some buddies that play on Monday night, just old high school friends, and I'm running them through a module called the Black Worm of Brandonsford, and there's a witch living in a hut in the woods, and I had just read Three Hearts, Three Lions, and that witch was the easiest role playing I've ever done. I knew what she was about. I knew what she wanted to do. She referenced calling up a wee sprite, and of course it was like a crazy demon, and all that stuff. It is amazing when you read that stuff how much is just sitting there waiting to be picked up and used, and how it can.
Right, and now that you've done that once, the next time you can change the motivation outlook of this wise woman in the woods, but you get this foundation, you can move on, right?
Right. So 44 years, I'm wondering, what was the impact of young adulthood on your game? You start when you're 11 game mastering. You've been playing since you were 9. Uh, did just the growing up and the changing of priorities and that kind of stuff, did that have an impact on your campaign?
One thing that was interesting was by the time I was 15, I was running 2 different groups inside Seaward. And one group was high school friends, all roughly my same age. And the other group was largely adults, ranging from 19 to 45.
Wow.
And they were in different parts of the kingdom. And, excuse me, that's when I really started tracking time very carefully, because I had to start keeping very copious notes. But seeing the difference in play styles between my near peers and older players really helped me focus in on what was engaging and what would keep people engaged long term. Because the older players weren't there to just goof off and crack silly jokes about Monty Python Quest of the Holy Grail and those sorts of things. Although it did happen.
Yeah.
They were much more interested in having an impact upon the campaign world and having that matter. And it really prepped me for that. And then I also got to experience the drama of, Joe and Ann met at your gaming table, and now they're dating, and now they've broken up, and they're still coming in, and how to deal with that sort of thing.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Yikes.
So dealing with that was a ton of fun.
Especially if Joe and Ann are older than you are, right?
No, those were a couple peers of mine, and I'm using fake names so that Bob and Lisa won't get mad at me if they hear this. But having a married couple in my older team really helped me sort of deal with that.
Interesting.
So, and I also, by having 2 different parties, I learned a great deal about time management and character management, resource management. And then very early on, I would always start insisting you have to have at least 2 characters.
Yeah.
Have to. And I've always been insistent that people have multiple characters, simply because managing your time leads to needing more than one character.
Right. Well, and that was your first kind of spark, was when you got to make another character after your first one died, right? So you can let go of part of the investment in just one. But that gets to this strict timekeeping, which is part of your psychotronic rules.
Right.
And Gary was very adamant that strict timekeeping, well, it unlocks stuff, right? Like, it seems like an odious rule looking back on it from where we are now.
It's not that hard to keep track of where the guys are on the game calendar.
Okay.
I'll be honest, I've never understood this. Oh my gosh, that must be so hard to do.
Okay.
Well,
you figured it out when you were 11, right?
12, 13, yeah.
Okay. But what does that unlock for people that are willing to?
Well, let's talk about another element, verisimilitude.
Yes.
Right. The world has to have an internal logic that makes sense internally, and the reason I insist on that is related to something I said earlier. People want to engage in your campaign world. The only way that this makes emotional and mental and logical sense is if the world is predictable in such a way that you can make accurate predictions. Right? The example I give is Superman is weakened by kryptonite because he's Kryptonian. Therefore, Supergirl is also weakened by kryptonite because she's Kryptonian. Completely fantastic. You're talking about aliens who can fly through the sun and a magical rock that can kill them.
Yeah.
But it's internally consistent. And you need that inside your campaign so that people can make accurate predictions about your world. If you get a situation where a player can say, I want to come up with a spell so I can defeat this enemy. The enemy is attacking and will be here in 60 days. And I know the rules say it takes me 60 to 90 days to make a new spell. If the GM just says, well, just go ahead and make it and it'll be ready right away and you can use it before he gets here, that suddenly doesn't make any internal sense.
Yeah.
And by not making any internal sense, they can no longer make predictions. Can the villains do that too?
Right.
Can monsters do that? If I can be in two places at the quote-unquote same time in the campaign, can the villain do that? And so on.
And
so
I think
it's very essential.
Yeah, you mentioned when you were on, I think it was the Geek Gab podcast, you talked about like the idea in some modules that the monsters just stand there in a T pose waiting for you to arrive. And whatever they're like, someone screams action the moment you approach the dungeon, and then they have
It drives me insane. Yes.
All right.
I mean, my super dungeon, which is what I call it from way back when, Skull Mountain, a lot of players, the first time they go in there, are really surprised because there's latrines and water sources in places where it makes sense.
Well, there's those. So, like when you're writing a short story or a novel, they talk about how like you can put some window dressing in there or like stairways that lead off, and you don't have to write the whole rest of it, but just having it there suggests a wider world to the reader. Whereas you have kind of, just through keeping track of what other players have done, you have those, right? Like, what's the quote?
Never trust Rupert.
Never trust Rupert. That's something that was scrawled on the wall by characters a long time ago, and the new characters found their kind of safe room in the dungeon, and like indecipherable to them, right? Like they wouldn't know what that means.
They know what it meant, but they know not. But they now know you never trust Rupert.
Have they come across Rupert, or is Rupert long dead?
Rupert is not only not long dead, but they treat him as if you just spotted Godzilla. It is stark raving panic. Players literally, like I'm running. Well, you're encumbered. I drop my pack full of gold and I run.
I've never met Rupert, but I know not to trust him.
You can't trust Rupert.
That's awesome.
Well, here's another example. I was a set of players. We're going through an area in the campaign called the Stone Hills.
Okay.
Going through in the camp, and one of the players said, "Well, I'm playing a scout. He's in a scout." I'm like, "Oh, well, you find a stack of copper pieces on the other side of this log. It looks like they're buried under dry leaves, but the leaves have blown away, and there's just neatly stacked 2,000 copper pieces." I'm like, what? Yeah. Like, well, that weighs a lot. We're going to leave it there. We'll come back for it. I'm like, okay. About 3 real weeks later, like, we left the copper there. We should go back for it. Like, oh, it's only 2,000 copper when we go back. And they flat out said, why is it there? I said, back in 1983, George Schumar said, we're encumbered. We're just going to hide these coins here, and we'll come back for them. And they never did either.
So did they retrieve them, or are they still abandoned?
Oh, they're still out there. Still out there.
So they're the equivalent of the Trolopulus jar of wheatback pennies, right?
Right, and this happens. And if you're keeping track and keeping notes, for example, inside Skull Mountain, at one point they're creeping along, and they check for secret doors. I have no idea why. And they find one, and they find this little niche about 4 feet wide, 7 feet long, with an old hammock hung up on pegs, and rotted away rations on the side. Like, what the heck is this? Well, the player character had used a lyre of building and stuff to put in a little hidey hole, so you have a place to hide in the dungeon.
Lyre of building, that sounds powerful.
Oh yeah, it's cool stuff. So these things happen, but again, you're having an impact on the game, and it happens in the future. In Skull Mountain, 3 of the levels were built by player characters.
Wow.
Where the reasons that other monsters are in Skull Mountain attracted players who did the same thing, who moved in. Currently, there are 2 player characters that live in the dungeon full time.
So, like, the players are almost like monsters in that they're attracted by the treasure and wanted a hospitable place in the dungeon.
Exactly right, and I had to add patrols from one of the PCs to the random encounter charts in the dungeon, because there's certain areas of the dungeon he's got troops on patrol.
Oh my gosh. You have PCs on your random encounter.
We've got PCs and their followers on the random encounter chart. Absolutely.
That is mind blowing. That is
It is, but
hilarious.
that's what happens over time.
Yeah.
And over time, these things build up naturally. And if you've got attention to timekeeping, verisimilitude, resource management, this just grows and stays.
That is amazing.
And when new
And
players come in, they see this and they realize that they're joining something. And it really adds a lot of weight to the fun that you're having. Knowing that you're going to leave behind a legacy that other people are going to run into. My oldest son hasn't read most of them, but has a copy of all my core notes. When I'm dead, he can keep running the Seaward.
yeah. Well, okay, so that's huge in and of itself, but I want to go back a little bit and
Sure.
talk about the artifacts that former play leaves for others. It changes your idea of becoming a good player. At least I feel this.
Sure.
Not just to survive and work your will on the campaign, but also to do things that matter, not only in the sphere of what's going on, but that other players will tell your story, right?
Correct. And that's what multiple players, characters per player, multiple groups of people that play together or not, strict timekeeping makes possible.
A legacy.
A legacy, growth and legacy over time.
Yeah. All right. So we've been teasing it. Before we get to the main topic, I do want to give you a chance. If people want more Rick Stump, how can we support you best?
Well, I'll be honest with you. I'm going to explain. I've had some spotty blog posting and podcasting recently. I've been in the hospital a lot the last 18 months. Nothing life-threatening at the time, but it has kept me going. But I have a podcast you can find on Spotify, Apple, etc., called Lore with Rick. Thank you for the splash up there.
Yeah, yeah.
The best place to find links to all my other stuff is the blog that you put up earlier, Harbinger@blogspot.com. There is a link there to my Discord, and we call it Best Discord. It's very active. We have 2 simple rules: be nice, and tag any cursing that you wouldn't want to do in front of your grandmother. And that's it, pretty much it. We talk about a lot of stuff. You don't have to participate. We have thousands of threads that come in and talk about gaming. And that's it. And from there, you can find links to, I'm a hobbyist, so about half of all the things I write and put out there are free.
Cool.
And the rest, I try to keep as low cost as possible. So,
right on, man. All right. So,
the map. Yeah.
Yeah, it's time to talk about the topic of today, how you handle domain play. But right before I turn you loose on that, I want to ask, when I asked your opinion on this on Twitter, the first thing you said to me was, "Do you really want to know?" So I'm curious, why did you give me that out?
Well, you asked me my opinion about, and you used a particular phrase.
Yes.
So we'll get to that in the future if it's necessary. If you look at that map there, down the bottom right, you see it where it says Seaward. That's the name of a city. And there's that red line. Inside that line, along that coast, that's what I started with. That's the entire campaign started with. Here's a capital called Seaward. There's a river. It's on the coast. On the other side of the river is the Tower of a Good Wizard. And that's where you can learn spells if you're a wizard. And way down the coast is where the pirates are.
So 3 hexes on
3
the
hexes.
coastline.
Now, each hex is 10 miles. I use 10-mile hexes because I was 12.
Got it.
And it was easy to break them into 10 smaller 1-mile hexes. And that's it. That's all I had. Now, when you look at the rest of that map, the terrain I made. But the rest of that map, everything that's underlined in yellow, player characters made all that.
All right. And was the term that I used Patron Player, or was it Braunstein?
You used both. Separately, it was Patron is what you used.
Patron.
I have never, ever allowed any player to start a character above 2nd level. And I quickly regretted that.
And
Now, my friend
you used a term as well. You used the term Monty Hall.
Monty Hall.
How does that
Monty
connect?
Hall is a general concept of giving players something for nothing, or great reward for little effort or risk.
Okay.
So, for example, I've had players come to me and say, "Hey, man, we really like this game, but I want to play it out. I'm 5th level. I've got a +2 sword, and that's it. You're being awful stingy with magic." I'm like, "Well, stop staying close to home and go after the big. Go take some risks."
Yeah.
It's not that I'm necessarily stingy, but you guys keep hitting the same orc band. They're out of loot. You got to go fight somebody else.
You can't just kill crabs on the beach until you level up enough to take the boss on, right?
Exactly correct. So you got to go out there and you got to do stuff. At the same time, if you're 5th level, and you decide, well, the heck with it, I say we go straight down to the deep in Skull Mountain and attack the lurker. You're never coming home.
Yeah. They won't even sing songs about you.
Well, nobody will know what happened to you.
Yeah.
So to this date, everyone who's gone down the deep to fight the lurker, they just are never heard from again.
All right. Okay, so having been duly warned based on my own verbiage, and still desiring to know more, please walk us through how do you handle domain level play?
Your timing is perfect. Amongst my existing players, I've had 4 of them hit name level in the last 17 to 19 months.
Okay.
And they're all in the process of clearing out the domain. So here's how I do it. And this has been going on. Matter of fact, the map you're looking at is outdated. Let's start with Jennifer. Jennifer's playing a barbarian named Bridget. She's from Ireland land in the campaign. And the Stone Hills, which are on the blobby brown stuff on the left with the black squiggly line through it, that's the only road through those hills.
Yeah.
She went out there. It's full of barbarians, hillmen and berserkers, and such from the monster manual. And she found the foundations where orcs were trying to start up a fortress after wiping out those orcs. She's creating a giant hill fort. So we sat down over the long weekend, and she role-played out, following through, riding through every hex, scouting it all out with her troops, fighting the monsters that she found.
Over 50 miles.
I think it came in at a little under 1,200 square miles.
Okay.
Riding around with her troops. It took her months and months, even with flying scouts and large troops. It took a long time. There was one village that attacked her, so she wiped it out. There were 3 villages that accepted her as their new lord, their queen.
That's some Thulsa Doom stuff right there.
It really is. It really is. And then she parlayed with a group of giants, and rather because she wasn't sure she could fight them, it convinced them to move west, where they're going to bother the orcs, not her. Wiped out a goblin village. Found a 80-foot tall stone statue of a being that she thinks she recognizes, but has to go back and investigate. That sort of stuff. And we played this out, and it took about 6 months of game time to get this all done, and she's running back and forth. Now, if you look again at the map where it says Kingdom of Seaward, right in the middle, south of that river there, is an area called the Real Valley. Believe it or not, this entire time, although it's populated, no one's ever domained there. It's been one of the biggest jokes of the campaign.
Flyover country.
Exactly right. Jack domained there now. So he did something similar. He sat down. He used designs given to him by an architect genie, hired a bunch of troops, and then used some forced labor from captured hobgoblins that surrendered rather than be killed, and is having builder genies supervise it, and he's building a Japanese-style fortress there to house his cathedral and monastery, and he's going to rule over that area.
So it's worth it not to always kill your captives, it sounds like.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I've got an article about NPCs as rewards. My blog includes making allies with people, having powerful people do you a favor, taking prisoners. And indeed, one of the big things in the game is over in the west in Nicole, way back in 1986. Goblin Town was created. And what happened was a party with 3 paladins in it ran into a group of kobolds. Excuse me, led by goblins. It was kobolds and goblins.
Okay.
And they shouted, "Surrender or die." And they surrendered. And the paladins point out, well, since they surrendered, we can't kill them because it's surrender or die, not surrender and die.
Right.
So they took them off, took them out to a garnet mine there and said, well, you guys can work here and you're prisoners. And then Sue Pulsifer, Planet Cleric, said, I'm going to see if any of them are willing to convert and preach to them. I rolled some reaction checks. I said, yeah, 8 of them convert.
Wow.
Right. Now, that has now recently become the barony of Copperhill, where a 3rd-generation half-orc that was born and raised there is now their baron. And it's a large town where you've got 2nd and 3rd generation guy goblins, hobgoblins, not many hobgoblins, half-orcs, half-ogres, Zyvarts, which is my version of Zvarts,
Yeah.
etc. And then a prison where they keep humanoids that surrender and are safe enough that you can keep working.
See, that's the kind of thing I'm on about. Like, that is not something a DM would have just thought up.
Oh, I would have never thought of that.
Yeah.
Me?
That,
What?
That is something that just comes about through the ridiculous intersection of character. Well,
Yeah.
number one, the player's interests, and number two, role playing their characters well. Paladins,
right, and then we got the situation of other players said, man, we want these guys to work with us. Imagine having some goblin scouts in the dungeon. What are we going to do? So now, all throughout the land, if you run into a goblin or an orc or something, and they're wearing a tunic that has a big cross on the front and back,
yeah,
they're from Copperhill. They're good guys, right? Because no devil worshiper, because canonically in the game, goblins and stuff are lawful evil because they're devil worshippers.
Who was that? Who was in King Arthur's Round Table? Wasn't one of the knights a Saracen?
That was Charlemagne. One of his knights was a former Muslim. Yes.
Yes. Okay.
And he wore a prominent crusader's tunic so people would mistake him for somebody else, right? So now, if you got the money and you're near the west, you can hire a group of sappers, and it's a team of 12 goblins who are scouts with they got mining skills and stuff, and they'll come with you into dungeons for a stiff fee and build you a safe location to retreat to, check for traps, that sort of stuff.
So you've currently got 4 domain level players, and they're active at the same time. And
yeah, there's one southwest of the call, and then there's a 4th one, and you're going to love this one. This guy is putting his domain on the 3rd moon since the adventurers fixed the atmosphere plant, and it's got an atmosphere again.
Wow. So he's not even on the map. He's on a moon.
He's on one of the moons, right?
Is there like some kind of portal in the mega dungeon, or?
Yes, there's a portal in the mega dungeon that allows you to teleport from underneath a pool of water in the dungeon into about a mile offshore in the sea on the moon. But he has a spell jammer, so you can get back and forth that way.
Cool. That is really cool.
Well, yeah, and this happens over time. The moon became a sterile, lifeless wreck because back in the early 90s, another group of adventurers didn't know what this weird thing in the mega dungeon was, decided we're going to use its power to power something else. I'm not going to mention what it is because none of the existing players know what it was powering. And the first side effect was it turned off the atmosphere generator on the moon, so the moon became a vacuum, wiping out or causing to flee the entire population of this small moon, and corrupting the atmosphere plant in the dungeon so that it became a monster pool. So that every 5 rounds, a monster would be spontaneously generated and spit out and go into the dungeon.
No, that's a consequence.
Yeah.
Something about this style
Keith
of
did that.
play,
Keith is infamous for just breaking stuff. Yeah.
It's both hilarious and epic at the same time.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I know there's a big argument on Twitter right now about whether Muppets ruin your world or not. And I think, famously, 5th edition has a Muppet supplement.
Yeah, they do.
Electronic Bastion Land has creatures like Muppets living in it. And then I haven't talked to B-Dubs. I would love to. Maybe he'll come on. But I believe that in his campaign, one of the characters had access to a wish spell and noticed that in Muppet movies, there's always one human. And please correct me, somebody, if this isn't how it happened. But basically use that spell to wish everybody in the campaign into Muppethood except for himself. So the how something can be completely ridiculous to other people and like make them crack up, but also be completely epic and earth shattering for your own campaign. I think the way that Gary describes this is like that the campaign becomes an alloy of the best features of your best players, something that you guys co-created together. And
you have to be really careful about the goofy. I will warn you. You have to be careful. There was even an article in Dragon Magazine back in the day about a black dragon in a white disco suit with a disco parlor floor. In my experience, a little bit of goofy every now and then lightens the mood.
Well, that's where it bumps into that verisimilitude that you're talking about, right? Like if it would
internal consistency.
Yeah.
Okay.
If it violates that, if it would make the players at your table kind of push back and go, "Oh, come on, this is BS," then it's not good for the game.
For example, here's one that freaked everybody out. If you go to the right spot on the outside of Skull Mountain, find the right secret door on the right boulder and go inside, there is an Art Deco lounge with a large sofa and a TV that has 3 channels.
All right.
One channel is the weather report for the entire planet. Another channel is 24/7 infomercials.
Oh my goodness.
And the third channel is news reports. But in universe, it makes perfectly good sense because one of the moons has an exiled group of effectively aliens that are based on technology, not magic.
Well, and so that's where you get into the psychotronic part of it, right? Where it's like all the genres, all the time, however it makes sense for us.
I look at it this way. Psychotronic doesn't mean you have to use other genres. Psychotronic means genre is not a limiter. And here's a great example.
Okay.
Star Wars.
Yeah.
There are people that look you in the eye and say, it can't be science fiction because the Force is magic. That is genre as prescriptive. Science fiction has to be hard science. If current science says it can't be done and you've got it, then it's fantasy. It can't be science fiction. I think that's bad and limiting. The psychotronic concept is, well, it's got spaceships and aliens. Of course it's science fiction. It's got stuff that current science doesn't. Okay, it's science fiction and fantasy, and everyone loves it. Let's move on. Right.
Well, yeah, I mean that famously Star Wars it's dog fights and samurai and westerns. I mean it like mixes all the best stuff from a bunch of different sources.
And psychotronic, and matter of fact, I use psychotronic for 2 reasons. One, it's like a Russian Slavic term for what you and I would call psionics or psychic powers.
Okay.
Well, 3 things. 2, it's Psychotronic Man was this really fun, goofy movie. You get a chance to watch it. And amongst a lot of my amateur film review buddies, Psychotronic refers to a movie that's multiple genres.
Okay.
Like
so it hits on multiple levels.
Right.
How important is the session report to strict timekeeping campaigns?
Depends on how you mean it. I keep very strict records of every session and mark it off on a calendar.
Do you blog it?
Almost never.
Okay.
Don't get me wrong. I'll put in reports of this and this happened. You'll see some after action reports, after session reports on my blog.
Mm-hmm.
But I find myself in a weird position of too much or too little detail, and it bugs me, so I tend not to. Now, Jennifer has done a couple of session reports in character.
Oh, that's amazing.
On my blog in the past, where it's epistolary. She's writing letters to her brother or to her mother.
That's awesome. In-game artifacts.
Right, in-game stuff. Dear Mom, here I am. Yes, I got to Mass today, I promise. And I was talking to so-and-so. I don't know if I trust him completely, but he was there. And she does a lot of in-character journaling. And sometimes she'll publish that on the blog as session reports. Absolutely.
How do you handle downtime interaction, especially with your powerful patron player?
Oh my gosh. What do you mean, powerful what?
with your patron players.
I don't have any patron players. I got
I'm
players
sorry.
in main level.
I used the word. Oh my goodness! With your domain level, high level character, your name level character. What is the term that I should be using if I don't want to keep stepping on my own foot here?
I would simply say your players,
Your
because
players.
I don't think I've never seen the level of away table interaction go up or down when we finally make name level. It's always high.
Okay. And do
Right.
you is your Discord where that happens, or is it direct messages on Twitter or emails or?
Discord is where a lot of it happens. I have a ton of emails. I think right now in my Champions game. Oh, and let me put in my. I was going to do a funny blurb earlier.
Oh yeah.
My first edition campaign is 44 years old.
44.
My second edition campaign is now 21 years old. My Champions campaign is only 11 years old. And the new kid on the block, our only war campaign, is not even 5 years old yet.
But still, over 4 years old.
Yeah. Here's an example. The Champions campaign I'm running, I call the Atlantaverse. You can buy the setting for which is licensed for Hero Games at Lulu or at any other places fine games are sold, including the Hero Game Store. I have an email thread with Jack for one of his 4 characters that I believe is up to 1,200 replies.
Okay.
We do now. You want to talk about artifacts? I've got letters. I've got news reports.
Mm-hmm.
I have epistolary. I've got journal entries. I've got people have made videos about the Champions campaign, and that's all off table. But yes, Discord. I've got a group of guys that are Discord only. We do a lot of direct messaging on Discord, a lot of messaging on Discord. But if you're a first level guy and you do your first adventure, you got some money, that's going to be weeks of off table discussion. If we only play every other week, simply because you got a lot to do. The entire idea that you only interact with the world with money and hiring stuff once you are at domain level, I don't really understand that. I've never been in a position from day one where, all right, guys, session's over. See you on Friday, and I don't hear anything until Friday.
How much do you permit? Are there people that abuse the downtime communication?
I wouldn't say I've never really had to limit anybody. The only time it ever upset me was David Powell, God rest his soul. He passed away a few years ago. Was one of my original players. And one Sunday night, Monday morning, he called my house at 2 a.m. because he was up arguing and wanted me to adjudicate whether or not a spell he was thinking of making was going to be 4th level or 5th level. I said, dude, I'm going to see you on the school bus in the morning. Let's talk then. You woke up my mother.
You're getting me in trouble, man.
Knock it off. And that's once,
Okay. Because I feel like, so there's some people that have been playing with multiple domain level players.
Sure. Sometimes they're patrons where they just hand it to them and say, take over this. This NPC is now a PC. Sure.
Well, like, so for example, the Broriental adventures that happened recently with the curator, 50 people signed on. I can't imagine how much his inbox was lit up with everybody trying to do everything all at once. It sounds like you don't have that problem because, number one, after 4 decades, only 4 people have gotten there, and only recently.
No, it's not only 4 people. I've had something like 18 people hit name level.
Oh, okay, gotcha. So you're saying like right now, currently there's 4.
I'm talking about in the last 2 years I've had 4 people do it.
So it doesn't take 40 years to get
oh gosh, no.
Okay.
Oh no.
Cool. Well, that's good to know.
You have to understand, half of my first group of players are dead.
Yeah.
So it's been a long time.
Do you have limits on what can be accomplished away from the table?
Yeah, like time limits and resource limits. Sure.
Okay.
Here's an example. My Discord group was going to Wyvern Keep to stop their way to the 4 counties because we got the lead on where a powerful magical sword was lost.
Mm-hmm.
When they get there, I roll encounters, and it turns out that the armies of the orcs had descended upon Wyvern Keep, which happens a lot.
Yeah.
They're trapped inside the keep, surrounded by 1,000 screaming orcs. Fine. They were on, I believe, calendar was Reaping 14. Top of my head. The 14th day of the month of Reaping. Top of my head. We had other player characters that were not in the keep that were available. But Clint, down in Eagle Valley, couldn't make it. He was busy preparing for a war against an army of giant spiders. Athanasius in Real Valley couldn't do it. He was building his keep. Clarence couldn't make it because Clarence was in Seaward dealing with Yakuza from Japanland and his own little things going on.
Yeah.
And so on. And then Bridget was close by, but she was busy both mapping her domain, building her fortress, and making sure that when the orcs turned around, they didn't hit her like a hammer and wipe her out on the way out. So they had to send up the equivalent of the bat signal and find what player characters are in this same time area, not busy doing something else, and can make it. And I actually believe that the write-up for that is on my Discord as a session report from the viewpoint of the people inside the keep who really just sort of watched it happen.
So the way things are developing in strict timekeeping in the campaign will put its own limitations on what people can accomplish.
Yes, the most powerful wizard in the campaign didn't know that was happening because he was in the mountain in a hidden library, hidden skull mountain hidden library, researching a spell.
So, like, imagine, I don't know if this has happened. I mean, it's probably all happened in the length of your campaign, but has there ever been a time where stuff was about to go down in downtime and you're like, man, this would make for a much more intense and fun table experience?
Sure, because I'm using what I call standard time.
Yeah.
If you're in the middle of a dungeon and you run out of time, you pause time in the dungeon.
Okay. So you're not locked in the 1-to-1 outside of table time. You
No, I'm not using LARP time at all.
Okay. Okay.
See, I tried that. I'll be honest with you. People tried 1-to-1 time before. I did it for a couple months in high school during the summer. Didn't like it. Didn't work out. A lot of live action role players from beginnings of Vampire the Masquerade on use that 1-to-1 where every real day is a game day, blah, blah, blah. They've been using it for years and years. There's a few other games that have used it off and on or do use it. I don't find that it works for me. So I've always just used the time as described in the DMG where, it was like, oh, it's downtime. This would be really good at a session. Everyone agree? Yeah, okay, we'll do this at the next session. And that's what we do.
Right on. Thanks for explaining that, man. I have one question that I'm like, I don't know if this YouTube channel will take off or not, but if it is, it's one I'd want to know from every one of my guests. Can you tell me about one? And I feel like you've already given us a bunch of material, but can you tell me about one of your most memorable sessions?
Oh my gosh, most memorable session.
Doesn't have to be the most, just one of them.
All right. Once upon a time, there were the three great monsters of the Briars. The Briars is blasted, twisted, cursed place. You can see on the maps there.
Is that the entrance to Skull Mountain?
Yeah, that's the area surrounding Skull Mountain. You've got to survive getting through the Briars to just get to the Mega Dungeon.
Okay.
And the west was old One Fang, a maximum size, maximum hit point, very intelligent hill giant shaman chieftain with his club Manbreaker. And the main mountains were the Red Maiden, the mistress of monsters, who rode a giant owl, and wherever she went, horrible monsters followed. And the east was old Nobby, a one-of-a-kind unique monster that could not be surprised.
Whoa, okay.
The party surprised him. Old Nobby, I'm not letting cats out of the bag, Could not be surprised. It had a ring of invisibility and inaudibility. It's a giant, a type of giant.
Dang.
Used two types of magical weapons and was stealthy and would creep up on you. And it couldn't be surprised and was invisible and silent when it wanted to be. It had a group of nearby goblins that worked a platinum mine, and they got their 5%, and he took the rest. The party has to take him out so they can get to one of the substations for Skull Mountain orbital fire control. It makes sense in context.
Okay.
They know he's left, but he's left his mountain giant pal behind. They ambush the mountain giant, kill him, use magic to hide his body, and then leave behind a giant note as if the mountain giant left it behind.
Okay. That's clever.
They go to the place and they hide. They're not hiding as in they're like you can't see them unless you can see X-ray through walls. And they just wait. Old Nobby was sitting there and suddenly there's an explosion. Invisible Old Nobby excuse me, picked up the note and the explosive runes went off. And the party came charging around, got initiative. He blew initiative badly, and would not, without taking some serious lumps, actually killed him.
That is brilliant.
And it was just this long, drawn out. So you didn't surprise him. He would just delay, turn invisible, and then wait in ambush you one at a time and kill you.
They set a trap that forced him to reveal himself.
Exactly right. And they're able to encircle him and then attack him. And he never had time because teachers, well, I don't have a ring turned back on. He never had the time to activate the ring, and they just were able to dogpile him and bring him down.
That is some elite level play. Were you sad to see Nobby go, or were you like just enjoying what I was happening?
Oh, it was so much fun. I'm never the sort of person like, oh man, that was a great villain. Let's bring back his twin brother. I hate that stuff.
Yeah, no. Well, you talk about that. The status quo needs to be destroyed.
Yeah, right? Change the status quo. But that was one of the most memorable that's happened recently.
That's awesome.
The session and there's a session report when they did one of the one-offs. They did Isle of the Ape, and they said, well, when we got to the point of it'll do roughly 1,000 d6 damage, we stopped doing math. That was also very memorable.
All right. Last question.
Mm-hmm.
What is it about this game that can keep a campaign going for 4 decades?
I think one of the most interesting things about Advanced Dungeons & Dragons First Edition is its amazing combination of great detail and great openness. If there are specific rules just for grappling versus overbearing or punching, right?
Yeah.
You have saving throws that are specialized for if you drop this silvered glass mirror 12 feet, here's all the modifiers to see if it breaks or not. There's rules like if you're not wearing a helmet and you're facing an intelligent foe, 50% of the blows will be aimed at your armor class 10 head.
Yeah.
That's a pretty fine detail. On the other hand, there's big gaps. How do I determine whether this guy likes me or not? You can do a reaction roll. Well, I'm going to talk to him and try to convince him first. Well, that's up to you. Make your pitch. Shoot your shot.
Yeah.
Okay. How do I convince the king to let me domain on this border? You got to work that out. There's no role for that. Right? In the end, by focusing on the fact that it's a resource management game, it gives it so much space for everything else that it just keeps running and running and running.
So the idea of putting a booby-trapped giant letter on the ground to catch an invisible, silent giant foe was not something that was on your character sheet. It wasn't a thing you could roll. Like, they had to look at what they were up against and figure it out.
There's a phrase that I liked from back when of there's sort of two sorts of play. One sort is you look down at your character sheet. The other one is you look up and think.
I love it. I think that is probably a great thought to end it on. I want to be cognizant of everyone's time. Rick Stump, thank you for being willing to do this. Thank you for the encouragement.
This was very good. I'm more than willing. Give me a couple months, I'll certainly come back.
All right. I don't know if I'll still be around then. We'll see if I screwed up too badly or not. But I hope you had fun. I hope you feel like coming on here was worth it for you. If anybody is watching this now or later and you want to show us some encouragement, feel free to click on that like button and subscribe if you want to see more conversations. I can't guarantee they'll all be as worth it as I feel like this one was for me personally.
Thank you very much.
But I really appreciate it, man. Thanks so much for just seeing some schmuck on Twitter and being like, hey, go ahead, throw it up there. I'll be your first guest.
I always encourage people to do more in the hobby. So thank you for doing it.
Right on, man. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye.